for those that don't know me, I am John Lau. I am the Director of Growth at We're a online and mobile-only e-grocer. And like Josh said, today we're going to talk about frameworks for UA, skills for building a career. So give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I think in the last couple of years, there have been a lot of questions about like, okay, we're going to be moving more and more towards automation. And, Facebook has came out with optimization, value op, and then you have UAC coming out with TROAS, and more you have a lot of people leveraging the kind of big data algorithms to do our campaign optimization. What does that mean for a UA manager? And I think there's still so much that a user acquisition person or a marketer or growth marketer can do to develop skill sets that will, in my eyes, at least future-proof your career for at least the next 15 years. I could be wrong, but this is what I personally believe. So we're only going to go about like my definition of what is UA. We're going to talk a little bit about the frameworks for success. And then we're also going to talk about some other attributes that I personally look for in candidates that I hire. And hopefully those are the attributes that could carry them to success. And then lastly, we'll end with questions. So what is UA to me, right? From my point of view, user acquisition is a discipline in which a marketer applies the art of storytelling to proper media channels for targeted audiences in order to achieve a predetermined result. One thing I really, really want to emphasize here is the art of storytelling, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the frameworks. But for me, this is what UA represents. There are 4 frameworks that I think of, and I think this have been kind of other leaders in the industry have talked about various forms of this. But to me, these are the 4 frameworks that I focus on. First one is omni-channel orientation, meaning you're not thinking about one channel, you're really thinking about how overall different channels complement each other and work together in order to build a balanced media mix for you to sustain growth. The second is storytelling. You have to know how to tell the story of your value proposition of your product, whatever it may be, to the right user. And depending on who your user is, you might tell a different story. Product and understanding. You have to understand what is the value proposition of your product, right? And I think I saw a question earlier that was asking, hey, should UA fall on the product? We'll talk a little bit about that. I think that's a very interesting question. But this very, very intimate relationship with product is necessary for you to understand how to best market whatever it is that you're trying to market. And the last one is you have to be data-centric. You have to be able to do robust experimentation, create some at least basic modeling, and do it logically, right? Understand what it means when you're creating an incrementality methodology, or if you're trying to create a PLT, a very, very basic PLTV model. You have to apply like some very like common sense to your approach in order for you to be somewhat accurate. I changed the wording. Multi-channel orientation. You have to develop a deep understanding on how to create a balanced media mix for sustainable growth. Now, if you're anything like me, when I first entered the world of UA, my first job was to manage rewarded video ad networks, right? So my worldview was very, very, very narrow. Over time, I got my feet wet with Facebook, and then over time, I started working on programmatic and working with DSPs. And then now in my current job, I also have to manage social, right? So organic social and some brand elements. So as I mature in my career, my worldview of marketing is continuously growing. And with that growth, I'm starting to understand that, yes, while, for the longest time, spending a lot of my paid acquisition dollars on Facebook can bring tremendous success to whatever it is I am trying to achieve, I'm starting to develop an understanding. Okay, when I show an ad on Facebook now, what happens is most people don't click on it right away because they go on Google and they search a specific keyword, and so I need to run paid search campaigns to ensure that I capture those people that are searching us, or running shopping ads on Google through their merchant center. So you have to expand your knowledge towards multiple channels, right? Understanding how channels complement each other. I've spoken to people who's like, hey, my bread and butter is Facebook, and I think Facebook can carry the day. I'm like, hey, that's great, but what about how when I meet candidates, oftentimes what I ask is like, how do you think um, your company's UAC campaigns impact your Facebook campaigns? And there's no right answer. Really, what I want to see is like how they think about how different channels interact with each other and how it becomes incrementally beneficial for the company. And so it's very important with that mindset of when you're a UA person, you have to think multi-channel. You have to think about the overall big picture of the marketing effort rather than a singular channel. And the last piece I think is important, and it's a little tough depending on the size of your company, but being able to customize the success metrics by different channels. Should, let's say, your programmatic display have the same success KPIs as your UAC campaigns? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of that is understanding that interrelationship and how they complement each other, and then you could actually set the proper KPI for measurement for each channel. So that's something that I want to point out. The second piece is storytelling. For the longest time, marketing is really storytelling. What's changed with the advent of mobile is that the amount of time we have as a marketer to tell that story has reduced significantly. What's important here is that depending on the type of channel, you might have 2 seconds to tell a story, or you could have 60 seconds to tell a story. So it's important for you to understand, depending on the type of channel that you're on, or that you're leveraging, and the audience that you're targeting, that you're telling the right story to the right user using the right channels. And most importantly, when you're trying to tell a story, you have to develop a very, very empathetic sense of putting yourself in the shoes of your target audience. What do I mean by that? The right story for the right user can mean very, very different things depending on who you're targeting. So I'm going to use an example for my current company where we're an e-grocer. First example is, let's say my target audience using my, let's say, Chinese language campaigns on Facebook is typically a first generation Chinese American. English is their second language. They're immigrants. And so the story that I want to tell this person is that, hey, we can provide you with a taste of home. We carry products from where you come from that you won't get at Trader Joe's or Ralph's or at Costco, right? You can only get that from us. We will deliver a taste of home directly to your door. Second example, second generation Mexican American. In this particular case, it's probably primarily English user. The person probably shops at Ralph's, at Safeway, at Trader Joe's. In this particular example, I'm going to tell them a story about their love of food. These are the people who want to discover or celebrate foods from different cultures so that they can actually come here and, yes, they can buy stuff that they grew up eating from the Mexican heritage, but they can also discover other things from other cultures by using our product. Right? This is where, if I'm targeting the foodies, that's the story that I want to tell, right? Live to eat type attitude. And the third one is like, let's say if I'm targeting a second generation Japanese American stay-home mom. Now, of course, COVID time, everyone stay home, right? But in this particular example, if you're talking about a parent who's like constantly trying to run between work and working with kids, doing distance learning while being able to jump on Zoom calls, then the story I want to tell them is the cost, low cost, and convenience right? In this particular one, I really want to talk about product understanding. I think being a very, very strong marketer, you have to develop a very strong sense of product understanding. Now, does that mean you should be a PM? Not necessarily, but I think you have to work very, very, very closely with your growth PM or your broader kind of product team to be able to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses and what are some of the areas of opportunities of increasing down funnel conversion. Right, because a lot of people like to say, "Hey, UA is top of funnel. We do this handoff to product." Well, that handoff never really happens, right? If you're bringing those users in, you're kind of responsible for the entire user journey in many ways, right? Because retention is a very, very important key. So here's an example where at my current company, where we were. I was working with our growth PM to analyze, okay, I'm bringing these users in through these channels. These are their respective registration rates. But what are some of the kind of low-hanging fruits that we can focus on in order to develop better top funnel conversion? So we started looking at our onboarding experience. And through about 2 months, we started to redesign the flow. And about a month and a half ago, we launched the newly redesigned onboarding experience, and as you can see here, you don't see the y-axis, but it literally doubled our registration rate, and just massive. And of course, you could say, hey, your initial onboarding flow must really suck for it to see that jump. I was like, okay, that's a fair statement, but that's perfectly okay, because you don't know if something is sucking unless you actually experiment and try something different. And I think this is where building that really tight relationship, having the willingness to build this tight relationship with product is very, very important. Because I've known a lot of UA people that has this kind of blackjack dealer approach where they clap their hands like, hey, here's your user piece, and I really think that is not the way to go. So if you really want to develop a long career in growth, in marketing, and user acquisition, you have to be willing to develop a relationship and understanding of your product. Next one is about being data-centric. Now, in this particular case, I'm not saying hey, you have to be a data analyst in order to be a strong UA person, or you have to have some type of programming or data or math or statistics background in order to be a strong marketer. No, but you have to have the mindset of being able to want to actively experiment and model in a very, very logical manner, right? You have to be able to develop tests where you could logically test various models, user experience, creatives, and channels. You have to have the ability to build up basic growth models like PLTV, recoup, and incremental measurement. And more importantly, develop an ability to look at all metrics, right? We can't be only look at, my registration rate is this, as long as I improve that, I'm golden. Well, you have to also look at your purchase rate. What are some things that you can do to increase your purchase rate? For being data-centric, I think it's very important for a UA person to think of how can I validate my theories with data. But being open-minded enough to know that if the data doesn't validate my theory, that's okay. I move on to the next thing. You see a lot of people who are trying to force the data to fit their mindset or their way of thinking. And I think that's not the best way, right? And of course, everyone agrees with that. One thing that I want to showcase is, when I first joined our company, we didn't have any data support. And what we had to do was find a way to develop incremental growth. And it was easy for me in this particular case because I was their first growth hire. We've never done paid marketing before. Everything up to this point is organic. So I had that luxury of saying everything that happened before now is a baseline. But one of the trickiness of doing something like this is understanding, okay, your baseline is not a static thing. And logically thinking about this, your baseline will change week over week. So as I develop the baseline, I have to apply a week over week growth rate growth rate depending on the markets that I am buying in, right? So for example, San Francisco Bay Area, where we're more saturated, the growth rate is going to be very different than, let's say, New York, where New York is a very, very new market for us. So logically thinking about these things to impact different the definition of my baseline in different markets. Now, one thing that I know I input into my model in December was shelter in place, right? So in December, at the end of November, early December, many different states announced new shelter in place protocols due to the COVID rise across the nation. So I understood that because of this, my organic rate will increase, and therefore I have to discount my paid growth at that similar rate, so that I'm not overcounting my paid marketing efforts. So part of this exercise is being able to look at the market, look at the events that's impacting the market, and be able to logically think about, okay, these are things that are impacting my paid marketing efforts, and these are some of the things that I need to do to account for those things. So being data-centric, being able to take in data and making good judgment calls is very, very important for any growth marketer, even if you're not a mathematician. One thing that I'm going to say, where I'm going to pat myself on the back, is we eventually did have a data scientist to support us, and that person independently did a regression model in terms of measuring our incremental growth over the course of Q4, and we did a comparison with my kind of rudimentary baseline model. It my model was accurate within 2% of what they did. And I was just like, raise the roof. I feel really good about myself, even though I'm not a math major. Some other important attributes that I think like a UA person should have in order to really succeed in the long term are these 4 attributes. Curiosity. You have to constantly want to learn. Our market, mobile is what, 10 years old now, and we've seen, most of us here have seen how the market has changed dramatically. And in about 2 months, we're going to see the market change dramatically again, supposedly. But you have to want to constantly learn more, because this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about my job, is because every day I learn something new, and that's very important. Second attribute is adaptability, right? We've gone through, so many different changes that has impacted the way we look at the market over the last 10 years. So having the ability to change the market, understanding that the channels that are the kings today, one may not be kings tomorrow. And so being able to roll with the market changes is important. Empathy. I think it's very important for a marketer to be empathetic. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about storytelling. You can't tell a great story if you don't understand your audience. In order to understand your audience, you have to be empathetic and be able to put yourself in the shoes of your user. But this empathy also extends beyond the user to your own team, right? A lot of times in the past, I've seen, marketers will point to product and say, hey, they're not doing this, or point to engineering and say, hey, they're not doing this. We have to be empathetic about the different constraints and resources on different teams, and being empathetic enough to understand that whatever we do is a group effort. And so I think this is one of the most important attributes that any marketer can have. Next one is being fearless, willingness to challenge the status quo. I think it's cool, I think 2 years ago, most companies, including myself, most teams were super reliant on, handful of channels to drive their growth engine. And now we're all figuring out that, oh, wow, outside of these kind of like a handful of channels, there's a world full of opportunity, a world full of possibilities in terms of how we could actually grow. And one of the things that looking at this whole idea of looming ATT and IDH deprecation is you're seeing actually a lot more innovation into the market, whether it's on ad tech, whether it's on the buy side where we're thinking about different channels differently. I think being fearless is going to be an important attribute for a growth marketer. And that's it. This is really just my ideas of frameworks and frameworks that I believe a UI person should have in order to be successful in the long term. Love to hear your thoughts and questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. We have a few questions here. Some are sort of general around your topic, and some are actually, I think, specific. So let's see. Hi, John. Given your definition of UA, what would be for you the definition of brand marketing? Any thoughts around that?
I think for a very, very long time, you've had UA people, myself included, that like say, hey, I'm not brand, I'm better. I'm performance, right? The longer I feel like I've been in this world, the more I feel like those lines are getting more and more blurred. I think there are many similarities in terms of how we approach user profiling, a lot of similarities in terms of how we like to tell stories about our product. We simply do it with somewhat different mediums and in different manners, which is why earlier I was saying how the storytelling aspect, like you tell a different story depending on who your user is and depending on what channel you're trying to tell it to on. So I think I don't really see a huge difference between the two anymore. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So another one that's pretty tactical, related to some of your content. How can you use data and modeling with a multi-channel approach when you can't track across channels? For example, how do you gauge the value of search campaigns capturing someone who saw your ad, then searched it later? Is it just an estimate, or can you really measure this? I think you touched sort of high level about some stuff you've done, but any thoughts there around multi-channel?
Yeah, I think there's, at least personally, I haven't seen anyone be able to do this really, really deterministically. So yes, a lot of it, for me at least, is very estimate based. It's inferred by our customer journey. So for example, through my MMP, currently I can still get data in terms of, okay, this person saw my ad on Facebook, and then this person then goes on paid search to search for my brand keyword, for example. And so what I look at is the percentages of people moving from one channel to another and understanding, okay, what is the actual ad journey for that user before the actual conversion on our website. And based on that, I am able to estimate different KPIs for different channels, different CPA, for example, metrics for different channels, so that I can continue to see overall growth. Because one thing that I've seen in the past, or I've been guilty of this in the past, is like, hey, why am I spending any money on programmatic display, or right? Because if I measure it with the same yardstick as the one I'm using for my UAC or Facebook campaigns, it's horrible. It isn't working, right? But fundamentally, it shouldn't. It serves a different purpose, right? It showcases your brand out there and be able to tell people that this is what my brand does very, very, very quickly. And then when they see our Facebook ad, it helps to understand, oh yeah, I remember seeing this, and this Facebook ad actually gives me a deeper understanding. So you're actually looking at your channels in terms of different funnel metric conversions, and I think that's a better way to approach it. But like I said earlier, I haven't seen any company that's actually been able to deterministically be able to measure this. So a lot of the methods that I'm currently using is still a lot of estimating.
Got it. Let's see. All right, last call for questions for John. I'm sure he can field questions about hiring. He can probably talk about that too as well. He's pretty experienced there. Give it here 30 seconds or so, and then otherwise we can jump into the next session.
The one thing that one comment about the hiring piece, when you are talking to different candidates, is asking them how they look at measuring performance. And in my history, what I've seen is that a lot of people are like, oh, I look at 7-day ROAS, or I look at D14 ROAS or D60 ROAS or something like that. But one thing that I personally look for, and then typically I challenge them, is like, okay, going back to my social casino days, right? We have really, really high CPIs, and people, I use VO and I capture a very, very high paying user, and my day 7, day 14 ROAS might look incredible. And I think, okay, good, I did my job, I'm done, But then you come to realize, okay, that person is in what you call a honeymoon phase, right? They're very infatuated with your game, maybe for the first 10, maybe at stretch 14 days. And then you see that recoup curve flatten out incredibly quickly. So when you ask a candidate about that, seeing if they have a really good answer, are they really thinking about beyond just that initial kind of like top of the funnel ROAS metric, and being able to eloquently explain their mindset and talk about, okay, these are some of the considerations I take in the longer term retention. This is how we account for that in our PLT modeling. I think these are some of the things that I would look for in terms of hiring a good marketer. And it's okay if they don't have the exact answer. It's really understanding how they're thinking about it.